What's up, Doc? Welcome to the Docs Get Money podcast. Are you a badass doctor killing it professionally and has bigger dreams than just clocking in and out of the hospital? Do you want to leave behind a legacy that is as lit as an HBCU homecoming? Want to know how other doctors are getting to the big bag? That's right, making 5, 6, and 7 figures without putting on the white coat? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Kimberly, but you can call me Kim or KB. I went from being a burnt out and overwhelmed emergency physician to the founder and CEO of 2 six-figure non-clinical companies and beating burnout along the way. I'm also your business coach, here to help you make money moves to change the world. This podcast isn't just about making money, though. It's about leveling up your life, mindset, and bank account so you can build an empire that's as iconic as Beyonce. You ready? Let's get into it. Hey, Doc. Burned out? Ready to just burn the whole hospital down? Well, let's start a fire. Okay, no, not in the hospital, but in your bank account. And from side hustler to CEO, my signature one-on-one business coaching program, you'll transform your burnout into a fire and start your own profitable coaching, consulting, or midterm rental business and make clinical cash in 90 days or less. That's right, 4 or 5 figures in 90 days or less. This is only for doctors who are done being overworked and undervalued and need a way out of the hospital now. With your fire offer, you're not just dreaming about escaping clinical practice, you're building your own emergency exit. In 90 days, you could be your own boss, making bank, and actually enjoying your life again. So are you ready to swap those singed scrubs for CEO status? Then hit me up at Dr. Kimberly B on Instagram with the word burn, and let's turn that burnout into the bag. Thank you, Dr. Nicole Rochester, for joining me for another episode of the Docs Get Money podcast. Please share with my audience. I've already said in the introduction, of course, everything about you, but you tell us, who is Dr. Nicole Rochester?
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Kim. I've been excited about this. And who is Dr. Nicole? Wow, that's a loaded question because I feel like who I am, like the way I introduce myself now is evolving, and I'm still trying to figure out, who is Dr. Nicole and like who am I representing in this season of my life. But I guess I would say that I am a purpose chaser. I am a mom. I am a pediatrician. I am an encourager and a survivor and somebody out here trying to make money while having an impact.
Yes, and so many other different things. A friend, a soror, to not me, unfortunately. A soror in my heart, a sister. Not
Yes.
all sorors are your sisters, but
That's
But
right.
this sister doesn't have to be my soror, but a sister, a friend, an entrepreneur, a survivor. You are so many different things. So tell me a little bit about you and your background, how you grew up, and tell me a little bit about your path to medicine.
Yeah. So I grew up, I have 4 siblings, and I am number 3 in that group. And my parents got divorced when I was really young. And interestingly, and this is in the 70s, we were raised primarily by our dad. We had a great relationship with our mom, saw our mom every weekend, but our dad was the primary custodial parent, so to speak. So we lived with him. He was very strict. He was a police officer. And so because he saw all the things, and this is in DC, he was a police officer in DC. We lived in Maryland. But because he saw all the things, he did a lot to protect his children. And so there were a lot of rules. And of course, one of them was education and academics. So there was an expectation in our house that, you would do well, you would study hard, all those things. So that was instilled in me from a very young age. And I was a great student, loved school, like really, really loved school, loved science, loved math. Um, and developed an interest in medicine, I would say really early. I'm really dating myself, Kim, but we had encyclopedias in our house.
So
And
did
in
I.
addition to okay, good, good. And in addition to the standard Britannica ones, we had this medical encyclopedia that was really, really big. And I was like the only one in the house that used to read it. And it had all these cool pictures of like chicken pox and cuts and wounds and all these things. And everybody else thought it was gross. And I thought it was so cool. And I would just spend time reading through this encyclopedia and diagnosing my siblings and diagnosing myself. And my dad would always second guess me, like, I don't think that's what it is. And then we go to the doctor, the pediatrician, and they'd be like, yep, that's what it is. So early on, I really had this interest in medicine, and always loved, even though I was a kid myself, always loved children. And like when I was a teenager, started babysitting, working at summer camps. So it just seemed like a natural thing for me to be a pediatrician because I loved medicine. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, loved taking care of kids, whether it was babysitting, camp setting. So from an early age, like probably 8, I started walking around telling everybody that I was going to be a pediatrician.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I was not as clear as I was going to be an emergency medicine physician. Like that's so crazy. So that desire of being a pediatrician specifically carried you from being a child, I'm assuming, all the way through undergrad. And then tell me, where'd you go to undergrad? I forgot.
I went to Johns Hopkins.
Oh.
Stop.
Sorry, because everybody knows, like, oh, the Johns Hopkins University. Yes. How could I ever forget that? Tell me a little bit about. Let me pause. Tell me a little bit about your experience at Johns Hopkins because people have that reaction. So, what was it really like for you?
Hopkins was a great place to become prepared for medical school. I will give them credit for that. It was extremely rigorous,
Hmm.
but luckily I had attended a high school that had a special program for science and technology. So we already had taken a lot of advanced science and math courses, had to study a lot. So I was prepared for that rigor. And then, of course, Hopkins prepared me for the rigor of medical school. So I will always give Hopkins credit for that. Hopkins, at the time that I was there, was not very welcoming. And I don't even mean of Black students, of any, like, I just felt like in general, it was all about the name, the reputation,
Hmm.
the rigor. But I felt, and most of my classmates felt like they really didn't care about us. Like, it was like, you
Hmm.
should be happy, that you should be proud to be here and do what you got to do. But I didn't feel like there were a lot of supports in place. And so it was almost like we created our own support. And so
Hmm.
I can't remember the percentages when I was there. I remember, I feel like our class set a record, then the following classes set another record in terms of like how the percentage of Black students. So maybe it was like, I don't know. I always get this wrong. I'm just going to say maybe it was like 12%. I don't know if that's accurate, but there
Hmm.
weren't a whole lot of black students there. That's probably too high actually. But we quickly found each other, through the Black Student Union and through the
Right.
events that the Black sororities and fraternities were having. And so we were a source of support for each other. We had our own study groups and things like that. And it's really the friendships that I built there that I would say, helped me get through that, because it just wasn't, it was difficult. It was very difficult. But I enjoyed it because of the friendships that I made, and I also pledged Delta Sigma Theta there. So great memories there. I was in the gospel choir. So I basically did all the blackety black things at Johns
Hmm.
Hopkins and continued to be connected to the Black student alumni from there. So again, I don't want to speak badly about it because it absolutely prepared me for medical school. And when I was in school, there were a lot of my friends and classmates that did not have that amount of rigor, and they were kind of, they were challenged. And I
Uh-huh.
just felt like it's
Yeah.
not that medical school was easy, but I was used to staying up all night and used to having to study and all those things. So, but I will say I had a much better experience in medical school, if that makes sense. Like, who has a better experience in medical school than college? I felt
That's
a lot more
interesting.
support.
In
Hmm.
college, I mean in medical school. So talk to us about your medical school journey. Did you get in on your first application, and where did you decide to go? And then of course talk to us a little bit more about like what was like in med school.
Yeah, so I did get in on my first application, but I took a year off. So Hopkins, this is probably the first time that I went off the beaten path, so to speak. Now it's common for people to have gap years and things like that. But again, I was this very driven, too driven, but I was this very driven little girl that turned into a very driven teenager that turned into a very driven young adult. And so, but I remember when I was getting near this, like the middle to end of my senior year, I was just feeling like so burned out. And we weren't even using that term back then. So I don't know what I called it, but I was burned out. And I was questioning my ability to go straight through another 4 years of school. But as soon as I had that thought, of course, I'm starting to feel like, well, what's wrong with me? Everybody else is doing it. And why can't I do it? And feel like I was a failure. But I'm glad that I listened to that inner voice. So I did decide to take a year off. So I applied and got a job as a research assistant at the National Naval Medical Center and came back home. And by this point, I was living with my mom. And I came back home to my mom's house and worked as a research assistant for a year. And then during that year, I applied to medical school, took the MCATs, and got in.
Okay. So where did you go again?
University of Maryland.
University of Maryland. Okay. So still
Mm-hmm.
in the whole Baltimore
Yep.
area region. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny enough. I think we talked about this like a long time before, but I ended up spending a couple summers at the University of Maryland as a summer research student, and I actually really really liked it
Yeah.
as a student. So, what was your experience like in med school? You said it was easier. You were like, "Oh, this is
Well,
like cake."
no, it's not that it was easier like academically, but it was just
Hmm.
it was a much more nurturing environment. We had a black dean, Dean Donald Wilson. Shout out to him. So we had a black dean. There were the school as a whole, and definitely the dean was really committed to diversifying the medical school, and so there were very intentional efforts in the form of scholarships and just support to make sure that we not only got in,
Hmm.
but also stayed, and finished.
Hmm.
And so there was just an environment that was very, very different than what I had experienced at Hopkins. And not just for Black students, but for all students. There were just a lot of people in the admissions office and in the student affairs office. And just, we always felt like you belong here. We want you to succeed. And then, as before, I definitely had a very strong network of fellow Black medical students. It's funny because one of my medical school classmates posted on yesterday, I think, about an experience where some of our white classmates had accused us of cheating because we were doing very well. And again, we had our study groups. There was a student, Black male, phenomenal. He's a surgeon now, but he was a couple years ahead of us. He would take us into the anatomy lab. So in the evenings we would go to anatomy lab and he would do dissections with us and things like that. So we were doing very well, and I guess they didn't think that we should have been able to do well on our own accord, and so we were accused of cheating. So there was some jealousy there, and I had forgotten about some of these incidents that she shared.
Hmm.
But from the faculty, for the most part, we felt very supported. So I enjoyed my time in medical school. Had my first child in medical school.
Hmm.
Got married in medical school. So there, I was doing I don't know how I did all of that but as a second year medical student, got married, had a baby, and still finished on time, which I'm very thankful for.
That's amazing. I have a question though. How did you deal with being accused of cheating when you guys were getting it out the mud, getting it out the
Girl.
mud?
Yeah. Um, It's funny because when she posted that, several of our classmates were like, I don't remember that. Like some people are like, oh yeah, and I have a memory of it, but it's I've come to learn, Dr. Kim, we may get into this later, but in the last year or so, I'm really starting to learn about trauma and how it has shown up in my life and the ways that we move through trauma. And some of that is by forgetting stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't remember I remember being accused of cheating for sure. I remember being angry about it. I remember that it didn't even get to the level of like, the faculty or like the administrators like having to
Okay.
investigate us. It was just basically like some kind of baseless
Like
accusation by
rumor.
a jealous classmate. Exactly. But I do
Okay.
remember being hurt by it, and just in general, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but I mean my whole life I feel like certainly from college on, being in this position where you feel like you have to prove that you belong to be
Hmm.
somewhere. Like I didn't
Hmm.
get into these institutions because I'm cute, or you know what I mean? It's like this, you have to work hard. And
Right.
even like I said, at Maryland, there were programs for us, but you still had to meet the academic requirements to get into medical
Right.
school in the first place. And I'm saying that because I know even now in 2024, there's people out there, probably not your listeners, but there's
No.
people out there who think that, black and brown people just get into school just because they're black or brown. So, but I don't remember like the details of it. I really think
Hmm.
there's so much of that I just kind of, my subconscious just blocked.
I still think that that's powerful, though. It's just like, yeah, you remember it, you said it hurt you, but I think that it would be so clear to see to everybody around you all that you were not cheating. That, like I said, that it didn't even rise to the level that you needed to go to anybody's office or make a report or do anything like that because it was so baseless. And I think that speaks to the power of what you guys were actually doing. Like I said, no, we are literally doing the work. Like if you were spending the nights even if
Hmm.
having a newborn or about to have a newborn pregnant, standing in an anatomy lab trying to figure out what nerve goes to this and why is that important and all those other things, then of course that you would do well if you are dedicating your focus, your drive, and your energy towards that. So I
Hmm.
mean, I think that speaks a lot as well too, and I'm glad that, like I said, that didn't rise to the level where you had to like fight anybody else
Yeah.
above that. Um, well, I guess that leads me to residency. So, how did you pick where you went to residency? Where did you go? Tell me about your resident experience, because finally,
Uh,
Dr. Nicole about to be intern pediatrician MD. So,
yes.
how did you get there?
So I'm from Maryland, and so you can already see the pattern. I've stayed in Maryland for everything. And so so DC is like literally, 15, 20 minutes away from where I grew up. And because I wanted to be a pediatrician, I knew that I wanted to train at Children's National in DC. So that was my
Mm,
first choice. I don't even remember the other. Okay, I know I interviewed at a couple of places in Virginia, but by this time I'm a young mom, young wife, so I really didn't feel like, not that I couldn't, but it would have been a lot to relocate like far, far away from where I already lived. So mostly I was looking in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so I matched at my number one choice, which was Children's National in DC. And really, I mean, that was an amazing experience. Again, of course, difficult. This is before work hour restrictions. So we were taking calls sometimes every third night, every fourth night, a couple of every others, um, staying in the hospital the whole next day. Like it was crazy. But working there, because it's Children's National, they don't only take care of kids that are local, but we got a lot of children from foreign countries that would come in, who have very rare diseases and things like that, because there were so many experts there. And so I got a chance to see things that you only read about in the textbooks. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And I felt, like it really gave me a great preparation for becoming a real attending doctor.
what are some of the things that people send children to Children's National for? I guess I relate to the experience, of course, because I trained in Memphis, St. Jude, even though my training specifically didn't take me there. But I do know that kids come from all over the world to for sickle cell treatment, for different types of rare cancer treatment that they're of course known for at St. Jude. But I guess what is Children's National known for?
Yeah, I would say a lot of that same thing. So cancer treatment, rare diseases like rare genetic disorders. There was a lot of that there. Very complex surgeries like congenital. We did a lot of congenital heart disease and a lot of very complex repairs for congenital heart disease. Those are the things that come to mind, like rare conditions, genetic conditions, surgeries. Yeah. And I
Okay,
think because it's in DC, I think a lot of like dignitaries and, like the embassies and things like that, I think that
that's
may have been
true.
another reason why we often got international patients.
That's true. That makes a lot of sense. All right, no, that makes sense though that you had so many different people because of the embassies and things like that. But that clearly took you through residency, and now you are an attending. So what's attending life like? Talk to me about where you've been since residency, which is it's
Yeah.
a lot going on. A
So,
lot
let
going
me
on.
think back, girl. Okay. So when I finished pediatric residency, hospital medicine in the adult specialty was a thing, but an early thing. But pediatric hospital medicine was just starting to emerge. There were very few jobs, very few programs for that. Most pediatricians were still going to the office and then driving over to the hospital during their lunch break or after the clinic was over. But I really enjoyed the hospital. And so I was one of these rare people that loved my continuity clinic and I loved the hospital. I loved the acuity. I loved doing procedures. So I was kind of torn between whether I was going to do outpatient pediatric, primary care, or whether I was going to look for one of these few pediatric hospital medicine jobs. I ultimately decided to start with in primary care. So I worked for Kaiser Permanente in Maryland, and I was a primary care doc, and that was a great experience as well. I did that for almost 4 years before I transitioned to hospital medicine. And the main reason I transitioned is one, I was starting to get bored. In pediatrics, and this may be true in adult medicine too, but in the outpatient setting, there's like 5 or 6 things that you see like over and over and over again. And then every now and then you'll get some other things, to kind of spark up the day. And so I loved interacting with the patients, loved talking to the parents, but was starting to get a little bored with some of the routine. And also, I'm the kind of doctor and person in general, like I talk a lot and I like to connect to my patients, which ends up showing up in my career later. It was very important to me to spend time with my patients, to get to know them, to talk to the parents, to make sure everybody in the room understood what I was doing, why I was doing it, to answer questions. And that's not really how you do primary care medicine, where they're giving you these little 15-minute appointments. I think back then it was 15, now it's probably like 8. So I found myself always rushing, always being behind. I would take the time that I felt was necessary, but then that would put me 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes behind. So literally, Dr. Kim, my routine every day as I'm opening the door to the exam room. Hi, I'm Dr. Rochester. I'm so sorry you've been waiting. Hi, I'm Dr. Rochester. I'm so sorry you've been waiting. And some people got mad at me, like some of the patients, they would get mad. But then once I got in the room, all the complaints would stop and they would be like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And then I would have other people's patients like, I want you to be my doctor, which made it even worse because more and more people were like moving over to my panel, which gave me more
Right.
patients. But so it was like, it was starting to wear me down, like emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
this idea that I can't practice medicine the way that I want to practice medicine. And in order to fit into this system, I got to be kind of like a robot. And I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
that all the doctors that work for this organization are robots, but I'm just saying that it was hard for me to do that day in and day out, feeling like I either was going to have to not give my patients all that they deserve in order for me to succeed in this system, or I'm going to be stressed out. And so it just wasn't a good fit for so many reasons. So after a little less than 4 years, I decided to go ahead and transition to hospital medicine and worked in several different hospital settings. I worked in community hospitals. I went back to University of Maryland for a short period and worked there, and then ultimately landed at a community hospital that was affiliated with DC Children's. So we had residents from Children's, first year and second year pediatric residents that would rotate through. And then we had medical students from George Washington University. So I got a chance to teach and I was taking care of patients and I became the medical director. So I was living my dream job, my best life. And then, life happened.
Then life happened. I want to go back to what you said though, and I think I'm glad that you said that from a primary care standpoint. Like you just don't have enough time to do what you want to do, and I try to tell outside people that that's a system thing. That it's
Yes.
like they don't. Of course, there's not enough of us. Period. Us meaning just doctors in general, physicians, MD, DO, MBBS, whatever degree you have to become a physician from whatever country you are. So it's like there's not enough of us to go around, and then the time that we have to handle, like you said, such complex patients, even if they're just kids, like even if they're normal, just well visits, things like that. There's a lot of education, there's a lot of connection that needs to be made because a lot of time you're dealing with first time parents, or maybe this is not the first time or for first time they've seen this before. So I guess I relate to all of that because as an ER doctor, I say I'm primary care as well too, even though the world doesn't look at us like that, but we're the safety net for everybody. And people be
Yep.
like, well, I didn't see the doctor, or the doctor hasn't been in here in so long. And it's just like, sweetheart, it's a million of y'all. You're not the
Yeah,
only one, in here. And it's like, I want to, the same thing is like, I always enjoy the time that I get to sit, and I feel like peeking my head in the rooms, like, "Hey, I'm Dr. Brown. I'll be in here in just a second. Thank you for your patience." Like, I'm always, doing that instead of, I wish I just had the time to spend the 20 minutes or however long it needs to be to actually get to the root of the issue, and then
mm-hmm.
going from there as well too. So that's interesting that you and I have had that reflective experience of that as you when you were in primary care, but also, like I said, what I feel like goes on in the emergency department as well too. And that
For
is a
sure.
cause for burnout. I mean, when you feel like you spent all this time, you know, becoming the thing, because now you're actually the doctor, the ER doctor, the
Mm-hmm.
pediatrician, the surgeon, the whoever that you decide to be in this space, and then you don't really get a chance to really do the thing that really gets you the fulfillment, not as much as you want to, because you got to deal with so much extra stuff. Like,
Mm.
no, that's a recipe for burnout. And I think that's why, because it's even less time, like you said, it was 15 minutes before, it probably is 10 to 8 minutes now, because even the pressures are even shorter. I think that's probably why we're seeing so much burnout in physicians
Definitely.
as well.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
okay, well, that took you to a fork in the road, it seems like. So what shifted? Because you're not full-time peds now. You've not seen a child in the office or in the hospital since before I met you, I
uh,
think.
well, the last time I took care of a patient, it was in a pediatric urgent care facility where I was doing some per diem work, and that was
Hmm.
before the pandemic. It's so funny how it all worked out, but that was probably about 4 or 5 months or 6 months before the pandemic hit. So 2019
Okay.
is the
Okay.
last
Okay.
time that I have physically taken care of a patient, which blows my mind. So yeah, it's been over 5 years. So in this dream job that I was telling you about,
Hmm.
I became a caregiver to my late father, like overnight. Like he had a caregiver, which was his former wife, and then he didn't have a caregiver anymore. And so my two older sisters and I had to kind of abruptly jump in. And he had a lot of chronic health conditions, and everything was kind of worsening. He had a lot of complications. He was on dialysis 3 days a week. Like there was a lot going on. He wasn't taking good care of himself. And so there, for 3 years until he passed away, we were caring for him. And I got a chance, really for the first time, to see, like, I guess the real side of medicine. Because, I'm over here in my little pediatric fantasy world. Not to say things were perfect, but, I mean, when it's a kid involved, people go all out. And so,
All
t-
out.
team-based approach, family-centered care, communication, like all of those things were necessary. And so I was used to like whole teams of people coming together to figure things out to do what's best for a kid. Then I started going to the doctor with my father, and I was like, what is this? And things were falling through the cracks. He had a million doctors. None of them were talking to each other. They were barely
Hmm.
talking to him. They really didn't want to talk to me. So I'm sitting there. I didn't tell anybody I was a doctor because I didn't think I needed to. So I would just go to the appointment. I'm sitting in a little chair that they have for the family member. And, I would jump in, or I would ask a question, or I would clarify something, or my father would say something wrong. And because he tended to minimize whole way there, Dr. Kim, he's telling me all his problems. Then we get in the office and the doctor says, well, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. So I'm like, no, it's not. So I became the annoyance to the doctors. And again, as a doctor, I get it. Like I was the person that was keeping them from moving on to that next patient during this eight
Right.
minute visit. But after a few visits of me being quiet and just showing up as the daughter, I started getting pissed off because I was being ignored and dismissed. And I had some very important things to share. And my dad really wasn't getting good care. So I started speaking up on his behalf. And one day in one of his appointments, I told them that I was a physician. And I'm telling you, everything changed. Suddenly the doctor has more time. He sat back down. Like he was literally on his way out the door. He sat back down. His voice changed, his tone changed. Now he's asking me more. Oh, well, what else do you think? And what do you think this isn't? Now all of a sudden I'm important because I'm a doctor. That made me even more angry. But the point is, I started to see how me being a physician, me being an insider, afforded my dad better care. I was
Hmm.
able to communicate with his doctors, his nurses, other people in the medical team. I could use the lingo. I understood what was going on. I was confident in terms of pushing back respectfully when I needed to. I knew how to escalate matters, especially when he was in and out of the hospital. I worked in hospitals for 15 years. But all I could think about every time I would solve some ridiculous issue or crisis, I would be like, okay, if I wasn't a doctor, I wouldn't even have known to ask this question, or I wouldn't even have known to ask for this person or demand this. And so I kept thinking, what is everybody else doing? Like, what kind of care is everybody else receiving, especially those who look like me and you? And so I was starting to have these ideas, and I started to feel this like pull, for lack of a better word, that I was supposed to be doing something else. But I'm like, excuse me, God, but I have spent my whole life becoming a doctor. I have wanted to do this since I was a little girl. There's no way you are telling me to leave medicine to do something else. Never wanted to have my own business, never wanted to be anything other than a pediatrician. So it took me a few years to reconcile this calling with like an actual, like getting the guts to actually leave medicine. But in 2017, I did leave my amazing job that I loved and started my company, YourGPSDoc.
So what was it? What was the thing? Was there one thing that was just like, okay, I'm done. It's time to leave, or was there a series of things? I guess what happened? Walk us through that moment, because
Yeah.
one thing I'm experiencing and hearing from a lot of us, meaning our colleagues, is just like they want to leave, or they're feeling a tug, and they're, I guess they're saving up for something, or they're waiting for something to happen in order for them to be like, okay, this is my sign. So
Yeah.
what was it for you that it was like that helped you to make that decision that now is the moment? And
That's
was
such a
everything
good
perfect?
question.
And
Oh,
was everything
no.
perfect afterwards?
Listen,
Okay.
you talk about a messy start. Nothing, literally nothing was perfect. And I'm glad you said that, Dr. Kim, because I hear that from our colleagues too. Like, people want to have this, like, some rainbow appears that says, start your business. And okay, I know. No, I mean, it was probably one of the worst times for me to do that, to leave that job, because one, my youngest daughter was going to be graduating from high school the next year and starting college. So you got a whole college tuition ahead. I was the primary breadwinner. Like, there were all the reasons. Everybody was on my health insurance. We had good health insurance. So I'm thinking, like, what is this going to look like for me to leave this job? And in fact, to be honest, I wasn't planning on leaving my job. I was going to gradually cut my hours down a little bit, gradually build my business a little bit. And then at some point, who knows, it probably would have never happened, which is why I ended up having to leave my job. But in my mind, my plan was, I'm going to cut my hours down at my job, build YourGPSDoc. And when YourGPSDoc gets to wherever I thought it needed to get, then I'll quit that job. But because of a lot of contractual things, that wasn't going to happen. Like, it just wasn't going to work out. And so I was in a position where I would have had to, give them possibly some of my revenue, my intellectual
Ah.
property. And I was like, oh, this is not what was not about to happen, is for me to create this brand new company and give it to y'all, or have you all have an interest in my company that has nothing to do with the work that I'm doing as a pediatrician. So I was forced to leave, but I had a 6 month, I was assistant professor. And so as faculty, I had to give 6 months notice, which was the best blessing ever,
Hmm.
because during that time I was able to, like, figure out what I wanted to do, how I was going to build my business. I paid off the student loans that I should have paid off a long time before that, finished paying off my student loans, paid off my car, and just
Hmm.
really, like, got my finances in order in anticipation of, making less money. Found a really good non-clinical job that was 100% remote, so I could work from home while I was building my business. But to go back to your question about, like, what the shift, I think, I was getting signs the whole time, and I just started getting more signs. Like, once people, like in our Facebook group that we're in with other Black female physicians, once people knew that I had been taking care of my dad, when they started taking care of their mom or their dad or their grandma, people started tagging me in posts like, oh, Nicole had to deal with this. Somebody would say, well, my grandmother needs to go to a skilled nursing facility, and they just came in here with a list of 3 places, and none of them are good. Like, what should I do? And I would be getting tagged. And so I'm like, and the first time it happened, I was like, wait a minute, and I'm thinking, okay, why is this? And then it just kept happening, where anytime somebody was trying to figure out insurance, or they had to deal with a hospital stay, or transition to a nursing
Mm-hmm.
home, or assisted living, we went through all of these things with my dad, and people started tagging me. And so I was seeing that as, okay, God, like, is this a sign? Like, and I would just help them, for free. I would just be in the DMs and tell them, do this, call this number, do this, go to this website. And then they'll be like, thank you so much. Like, I never would have known this. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have known it either if I hadn't had to take care of my dad. So I started having these interactions where I basically was doing for free the idea that I had in my mind that I wanted to do in my business. And I felt like that was confirmation that there
Mm-hmm.
was a need for this service and that there were people that I could help.
I love that. And the fact that there's so many different things I want to hit on. You said the biggest thing first is that one thing that holds, I think, a lot of people back, people meaning doctors, back from starting their own business, from believing in their idea and really going after it and actually putting action steps into place to starting a business is because they are in these restrictive contracts with these restrictive covenants that say that whatever you create when you work for said company is the property of said company. So we walk into a lot of contracts that we have without having the full knowledge and the understanding, or we see it and we're thinking, like you probably thought, I'm not thinking about what's intellectual property. I'm not even trying to think about child. I just want to see these babies. Like, just make sure my time is right and my name is right on my check and it's on time and I'll be okay. But we don't think
Yes.
about all of the other things that go into us being whole and human and keeping doors of possibility open for ourselves to, well, what is intellectual property, and what, how would I create that, and what would that look like as far as monetizing or making or creating a business or things like that as well too. So I'm
Yep.
glad that you were able, when you were about to, sounds like when you were about to renegotiate or like decide really what you wanted to do with this position, that you had the opportunity to really say, like, this contract is a no for me and I'm not really gonna get what I want out of that. So that being said, before I kind of tap on something else you said, what would be your advice to a physician that is in your same shoes? Like, what steps should they take to make sure that they're good on that?
When you say that they're good, you mean when they're preparing
Like,
to leave, or
yes,
or
if
they're
they're
just starting to think
considering
about?
leaving, if
Oh,
they're considering leaving and they want to create a business of their own or start something on their own, that maybe they don't even know it's a business yet or not.
yeah.
But how would they navigate making sure that, I guess from a contractual standpoint, if you had any advice about that?
Yeah. So in my case, I did, and I had been working there for years, so like over a decade. So I was digging through all my paperwork and going finding, looking through my emails to find like my original contract. And I don't think I ever found it. So I ended up going through HR to get a
Mm-hmm.
copy of my contract. And I just spent some time. I will say I did not hire a contract attorney. That may have been great. If I wanted to stay and work something out, that probably would have been necessary. But so I always recommend that, but I did not do that, just to be clear or transparent. But I looked through my contract, and that's when I knew I had a non-compete that was honestly overly restrictive. But like you said, it's like it's like, well, this is a good job, this is where I want to live, blah blah blah. So there were definitely things where I knew that it was a restrictive contract, but like you said, I never thought that was going to be necessary for me to worry about intellectual property or anything like that. So as I started reading through the contract, I did see some red flags. So I scheduled a call with a representative from Human Resources and basically told her, like, hey, I have this business that I'm going to start. Gave her a very general overview about what I'm going to be doing. Told her, because at that time I already knew that even though I'm a pediatrician, I wanted to help seniors, like aging adults and their caregivers. I wanted to work with people like me, adult children, trying to manage their own family while taking care of mom, dad. And so I explained, my concept, and she was like, "Oh, that sounds like what we do. That sounds like case management. That sounds like this." And she tried to build this case for that's a conflict of interest. And I'm
Hmm.
like, well, I'm not going to be doing pediatrics. And this is not case management. No, trust me, this is way beyond what your social workers are doing. And it's not pediatrics. And basically, I couldn't get her to understand it. So she was kind of saying, like, yeah, this clause would be enforced, this clause. And so after that phone call, I mean, going into it, I kind of already knew. But, again, I was scared. I was very scared and anxious about leaving medicine behind, leaving that paycheck behind, leaving those benefits behind. But after I got off the call, Dr. Kim, I knew, like in my spirit, I was like, you got to go. Like this was God saying, I'm closing this door, Nicole, because if I leave this door open, you're going to stay here and you're going to be comfortable and you're never going to take this idea that I gave you to, the heights and depth. So anyway, I was basically, I feel like I was forced because I either would have
Hmm.
had to choose my business or choose my job. And at that
Hmm.
stage of my life, I had to choose my business.
I
So in
love
terms
that.
of doctors, I would say read your contract. If you have questions, probably consult a contract attorney, because when you need to talk to HR, but they're going to always, everything they tell you is in the best interest of that institution or that
Right.
corporation. So seek some outside counsel, have an attorney look at your contract so that they can tell you, there might be loopholes and things like that. I think financially, preparing ahead of time for your exit is smart if you can. If you can pay off debt, that's great. If you can start to minimize your expenses, because it costs money to start a business. And I mean, in the beginning, I wasn't making any, and so I was having to
Right.
finance my own business. Depending on what you do, maybe it'll take off right away. But certainly with me, it took some months and months before I even had a client and all the things. So yeah, I would say the financial preparation, and then really, as you know, Dr. Kim, because you work with doctors too, like the brain, the mindset. 95% of the challenge is up here in our brain.
Hmm.
All that other stuff you can figure out, LLC versus S corp. Look, all the other stuff that the doctors get fixated on, and like the
Yes.
name. What about my logo? What colors am I? That stuff. If you can start working on your mindset and this limited mindset that somehow we amazing doctors have, we think that we can save lives, like literally save lives, but we can't start a business. Like, what in the world is that about? So
Yeah, and that is part of the
this,
reason why this podcast exists. Thank you for saying that. It is the mindset that you need to have, that if you, like you said, if I can save a life, I can do anything. I
anything.
can literally do anything that I put my mind to. That's so good. Well, now I forgot what I was going to double tap on, other than what I said about the contract. Um, you said you're just dropping so many gems. These are incredible pieces of knowledge and things that doctors need to hear. So, okay, let's just go back to, so you quit. And so tell us about your GPS doc. Like, what is
Yeah.
that? Tell us more.
So your GPS doc in its infancy stage was a professional health advocacy business. And a professional health advocate is basically someone whose job is to help you understand and navigate your health conditions and the healthcare system. And so I was working with a lot of adult children, taking care of aging parents, helping them during their parents' hospital stay, but also other people started hiring me too. Like, it started out with a lot of adult children and aging people, but then I had just somebody in their 40s that was like, hey, I have to have this procedure. I don't understand what the doctor's saying. A lot of my work early on was people whose family members were hospitalized, and they felt that the person wasn't receiving good care. And sometimes that was true, and sometimes they were receiving great care, but the communication was horrible. So it was, I'm serving as a liaison between the medical team and the patient and their family members, because I'm speaking both languages. So I'm going to the family and helping them understand what the doctors are doing, but then I'm going back to the doctors and helping them understand the concerns that the
Of the
patient and the
family.
families have,
Hmm.
making sure that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes that involves coordinating family meetings, um, helping people understand their health insurance and their health insurance benefits and what's going to be covered, what's not going to be covered, helping people find reputable, qualified healthcare providers, hospitals, nursing homes, home care agencies, and really and so that was like the direct client work. But a bigger part of that was also the education. So I don't know if you remember Navigator Nuggets way back in the day,
I
but I used to.
do. I do, because I was on Navigator
Yes, you
Nuggets. So yes,
were.
yes, I
Yep. So I
do.
used to do a Facebook Live show every week, just called Navigator Nuggets, where I would just educate people about, these are the three things you should do before you leave the emergency department, or these are the five things. Make sure you ask these five questions when you or your loved one are hospitalized, or it's open enrollment season. Make sure you read the fine print. These are the 10 things that you want to make sure your insurance covers, and just things like that, because I knew early on that not everybody was going to be able to afford to work with me as a professional advocate. And as a Black woman, it was very important to me that people that look like me have access to this information. So the way to
Hmm.
reconcile that was, okay, for those of you who can't work with me one on one, here's a blog, here's a video, here's some information, here's a worksheet, here's a guideline that can help you and your family members. So that's what I did originally. And I did that for the first 3 years. And I was doing some public speaking, mostly at like caregiver conferences and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And then in 2020, another shift happened. George Floyd was murdered, all the other murders, COVID. Suddenly, America realizes, oh, there really is still racism here. And then in the healthcare system, there was more talk about racism being a public health crisis. And
Right.
so I was on the board, still am, but on the board of an organization, and we had a conversation in a board meeting in June of 2020 about everything that was going on. And I basically asked the question, like, well, how can we address this, as this organization? And you know how you get voluntold, like you ask a question and everybody's looking at you like, oh, what are your thoughts? So I had some thoughts, and then I basically I was asked like, hey, would you be willing to do this? Like, how do you feel about creating the education around this? So I created a talk called Combating Structural Racism and Bias in Medicine or in
Hmm.
healthcare. And that was like the impetus that just took Your GPS Doc to the next level, because I started giving talks and webinars about racism in medicine and talked about health equity. That led to more talks, and hospital leaders were hearing the talks and saying, hey, can you come to my hospital? Hey, can you come to my medical school and give that talk? So of course it was during COVID, so most of everything in the beginning was virtual. And then those talks led to consulting opportunities. And next thing I know, Dr. Kim, I was a health equity consultant and a paid speaker in that space. And so now most of my work is consulting with hospitals and health systems and healthcare organizations and speaking. And then from there, I started doing some coaching. So yeah, Your GPS Doc is always evolving.
I I love that so much, Nicole, because I remember y'all. Okay, because I've been behind the scenes since very early. I haven't been since the
Yep.
beginning, but very early of the beginning. Like I said, I was on Navigator Nuggets. Dr. Nicole actually wrote the foreword for my first book that helped to
Yeah.
navigate people, helping people navigate through the emergency department. So, saying all that to say, I appreciate your journey so much. One, because you're a friend and you're a colleague, but I've seen your growth. I've seen how you have just decided to just start with what's directly in front of you, with what you know. Hey, I know how to educate, and I know this is what you guys need, and I know, this is what I'm going through, and just sharing from a place of service, which is something that I'm always talking to my clients about, is just being of service to other people, and how that navigated you to your first few one-on-one clients that you were working with, and then how now that's really parlayed you into having bigger opportunities and speaking to bigger stages nationally, corporations, and now making the big dollars off of your experience, your story, your background, what you know in your blood, both as a pediatrician and what you've experienced as well too. So, saying all that to say, now how old is your GPS doc now?
We just had our 7th year anniversary in July. So it's been 7 years.
So you have a 7-year old at home.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. You have a seven year
Yes,
old.
I
What
do.
what would you say? What would you say to a doctor both at the beginning point, like, okay, they made the leap and you're not making a lot of money and you're figuring it out. What would you say if you could give the advice to that doctor or the Nicole of
Mm.
2017, 2018?
Ooh, so many things. Get out of your own way. That would be one of my first pieces of advice. And there's a lot of unlearning that I believe we have to do as physicians to become successful entrepreneurs. So I feel like I could have been where I am now a few years ago. Like I'm okay with the journey. The journey was very important, and I could have been more successful sooner if I wasn't constantly getting in my own way with the perfectionism, the desire to control everything, being afraid of risks. All the things that, again, they served us well in the healthcare medicine environment. They do not serve you well as an entrepreneur. And I think also, like you just said it, Dr. Kim, this idea of bringing what you know, like everything that I do, even though now I'm in this corporate space and I'm working with these organizations, I'm still me. And so when I speak on a stage, if I'm asked to speak about health disparities, I am still bringing my experiences with my dad. Like I'm bringing my experiences taking my kids to the doctor, or or my own experiences with health in the healthcare system. I'm bringing my experiences from being a pediatrician and being a physician and working in healthcare systems. So like I feel like that's what makes me unique. And I think everybody's looking at the next person and they're looking at like their step 25 and they're at step 1 and they're comparing. And but it's like everybody that's listening to your podcast, they have their own unique experiences, and those life experiences to me are just as valuable as my medical degree. And so I bring all of that to the table. You know, they get the doctor, but they also get the caregiver, they get the mom, they get the Black woman, they're getting all of that. And that's why I think that I have been successful when I really started being more comfortable with like just being myself and like unbuttoning my top button a little bit and just, you know, leaning into it,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just need to like trust your gut. And I feel like there are signs. Like for me, there are signs in our lives that I believe are pointing us as to where we're supposed to be. And for me, a lot of this journey has been reconciling the fact that I do believe and know in my heart I was meant to be a physician, but I thought like that was my single purpose. So that's why I was struggling for those 3 years. Like, wait a minute, you want me to go start my business? Like, that's not a line. I'm a doctor. So like, but this idea that like we're not just a doctor, and maybe you will be a doctor and you have a business. It doesn't mean that you have to quit your job like I did
Right.
to start your business, but this idea that we are only supposed to be one thing and stay in this little tight box, we got to get out of that. Like we're brilliant, we're talented, we're creative. I used to tell myself I wasn't creative. That's because my creative juices were being completely
Stifled.
consumed. Yeah, and now that I have my own business, like every day I'm thinking about something. Like I have so many ideas, I have to just put them in my phone because I can't act on all of them. And I remember sitting there a couple of years ago, like, Nicole, you used to always tell yourself that you were not creative, but you are creative. So I think that may be another lie that some doctors may be telling themselves, because we don't always get to use that part of our brain in medicine.
That's huge that you said that, though. Self talk. Self talk.
Mm.
If you tell yourself a thing, that thing becomes true for you. So you sat there and said, I'm not creative, I'm not creative, I'm not creative. And that, I'm sure, impacted your marketing, your ideas about like how you were going to move forward. But when you decided to start saying, you know what, I am creative and I am, all of the floodgates are opening for yourself.
Yep.
And floodgates of ideas, and like I said, I'm sure you're implementing them, and there's probably still tons that you haven't even implemented yet, but the ideas still keep coming because
Yeah.
you have decided to believe and started to tell yourself more specifically that um you're creative. And I guess I bring this up because I see that, like you said, more specifically with the unlearning we as doctors need to do, because we have been told so much of this is what you do. You wear the white coat, you show up, you just deal with it. You don't worry about anything else other than what it takes just to take care of the patient right in front of you or the thing right in front of you. And so one of the biggest things that I see with my clients and the people that I work with is that I have to say to them, what are you saying to yourself? Like, what's the conversation that's going on in your head? How are you talking to yourself? Because that is back to what we were saying before, the 95% of the things that you need to be working on inside of your business is working on what is going on in here, listening to and challenging the conversations that are keeping you stagnant, as well too. So I'm really, really glad that you said that. Um, so your GPS doc now has got you to be a health equity consultant. And tell me a little bit more about what you offer, because it's more than just a consultant and you speaking on stages. How else do you help people, and have you parlayed all of this passion into any other ways or any other channels at all?
Yeah, so I do the consulting and the speaking, and then I also am a coach. And that was another mindset shift because I was telling myself, I'm not a coach. But as my business became more successful and as people, again, I started getting tagged, somebody would be in a Facebook group for non-clinical careers and say, is there a job where I can just help people like understand their medical conditions and how to navigate the healthcare system, you know, and somebody would tag, oh, Nicole's doing that. So then the tagging started again. And so doctors would DM me and say, hey, like, can we hop on a call so you can tell me about, you know, how did you start your business? So I was just hopping on Zoom calls or telephone calls, spending an hour and a half, just telling them about my journey and do this, talk to this person. And then after a while, people started saying, well, can you coach me? Like, can you coach me how to do it? And guess what my answer was, Dr. Kim? No.
I know you said no. I'm about to say, I know you said no.
I was like, oh, no, I don't do that. Like, literally, I was like, oh, no, I don't do that. I'm not a coach. And then the second person, hey, this sounds really interesting, but like, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I know you can't tell me everything in an hour. Like, can you coach me? Oh, no, I don't do that. So after like the fifth or sixth person, and this is not like back to back, and this is like over maybe a year, six people asking me, and I'm saying no. And finally, I was like, maybe I should say yes. Like maybe maybe I am a coach. Maybe I could be a coach. So then I started one off. Like if they would, I was like, I'm not telling anybody this is not anything I'm advertising. But the next doctor that asked me if I could coach them, I'm going to say yes. Like that's me and God had a little talk, and that's what I decided I was going to do. So
I'm sorry, I find that funny. It's like, okay, Jesus. No,
because I said, I feel like God, it's so, that story where they talk about the person that's like, the water's rising, they're about to drown, and God's sending them helicopters and boats and all this stuff. And they're like, oh no, God, I'm waiting on you. And then they drown and go and die and go to heaven. And they're like, God, like, where were you? He's like, I sent the boat, I sent the helicopter. So I started thinking about that, like, okay, God's probably sending these people to me. And here I am like, I don't do that. So we had this agreement, me and God, that the next person I was going to say yes. So sure enough, a few months later, somebody's in my DM and they asked, and I was like, yes. And I told them, I said, you will be my first coaching client. So I think it was 4 weeks, which was not nearly enough. But again, I didn't know what I was doing, but it's okay. I wasn't killing anybody. That's another thing, physicians. You're going to be iterating. You're going to figure things out. You're going to do some things wrong. But guess what? Nobody is going to die. So I worked with the doctor.
I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time? Can you say that one more time? For the people in the back, because they didn't hear you. They was too busy talking. They was whispering.
Nobody is going to die, physician, entrepreneurs. You're not going to kill anybody if you make a mistake. You're going to learn and you're going to be even better. So I will be honest, that the people I'm coaching now, they're getting a whole lot better version of me as a coach than the people that I coached, 2-3 years ago. And that's okay. Like that's not an integrity issue. But anyway, so yeah, I started coaching one-on-one. Again, if they came to me, I would say yes, but I wasn't telling anybody I was doing it. But then after a couple of years of doing one-on-one and starting to see results and starting to like tweak it, then I went ahead. I was like, you know what? This could be a group program. Plus this is when I started doing more of the consulting. So I really didn't have the capacity to do these one-on-one. So I was like, what would it look like for me to make this like a very small group program? So I don't even know how many hours formally recording, because the other ones were just live on Zoom. But now I'm like, I have this curriculum. I'm going to formalize it. So I went on Zoom and recorded a whole bunch of modules and lessons, put it on Thinkific. And I was like, okay, this is an actual curriculum. And then I started telling, I let people know that I had a group program. And so I've had 6 cohorts come through the group program. And it's basically for physicians who want to launch a health advocacy business. I am staying in my lane. Yes, there's business coaching, there's mindset coaching, but my program is specifically for that. So if you want to start another business, you go see Dr. Kim. But if you want to start
You're right.
If you want to start a health advocacy business, then come see me. And it's called Navigating Health Advocacy Ready, Set, Launch.
I love that so much. And there was so many different tidbits and tools and gems that I heard you just say, even just you describing how you went from one-on-one to your group. You didn't start or even start coaching in general. I think a lot of people have thoughts about what coaching is. And like you said, I'm not even a coach and all of those things. But for years, people have been looking to you for the advice along this journey and have been watching you and know that your story has been there. But what I like is, again, you being, I'm going to call it a hustler, but not in a negative sense, the hustler that you are. No, you were like, okay, again, I'm going to start with where I am. You are going to be my first one. We're going to get you results, and then we'll see what happens after this. And then instead of saying, okay, I'm going to be a coach, I need all these modules. I need to write this curriculum. I need to record all these videos. I need to figure out a marketing plan. I need to buy an ad. I need to... No. You didn't do none of that. You wasted none of your time doing that. And I think Well, you tell me, why do you think you didn't do that? Why was your
I will
mind just
be,
like not on doing that first?
yeah, one, by this point, I was already, 3.5, 4 years into my business. So I'm learning again, the other version of Nicole that started Your GPS Doc. I would have done all of that. I would have said no, and then I would have done all the things you just said. I would have created. I would have felt like I couldn't do it until I had all this stuff created. But by that point,
Mhm.
I had started investing in myself. So I had invested in coaches. I was, in programs and listening to business podcasts and hearing people say this idea of like minimal viable product. I'm reading books. I'm
Yeah,
understanding that again, like you got to leap, you got to take chances, you got to build, you got to get better. Like, don't even start building some whole program and you don't even know if anybody wants it. So by that point, I had this understanding that the client was going to help me create, the formal program. Because
mm,
how do I know what they need? Like that first client, she was able to show me what she needed and tell me what she needed. And then that would be like, oh yeah, I need a module on that. And I'm looking at all the questions that she would ask throughout the program. Like, oh, that's a really good question. Let me research that. And so by the time I started working with more people and with groups, I had all this evidence, all this data from working with individuals and understanding what they need, what they don't need. Okay, you got all of this, you still didn't launch, what was missing, and I was
right.
able to tweak that. So yeah, it was just, I mean, it was just the place I was in my life and in my business and with my own mindset,
Hmm.
understanding that I didn't need to do all that stuff.
I love the fact that you said that you evaluated along the way. That's not the word you used at all, but that's exactly what you did, is that you paid attention and found value in what you were doing as you were doing it while you were working with your clients and figuring it out for yourself. And really, like you said, being a very client led business, because like you said, you were really solving the problems that were coming up and helping her to walk through things, because how you came to this was very different than how she was coming. You didn't come
Mm-hmm.
out the gate, profitable, launching, do all of this stuff. That was not necessarily your same story and journey, but you knew now the steps that it took to do that. But I say that to say
Exactly.
evaluation, and really, like I say, finding value and everything that you were doing along the way, and even in the messiness of helping your client along the way as well too. And the fact that you still made money in you
Yeah.
figuring it out. It didn't have to be you had the perfect program, you had the perfect client, or you had the perfect price point even, in order
Mm-mm.
for you to get started to coaching someone. You just literally, again, it sounds like you just figured out from what you are, said this is valuable, this is helping someone, and grew it from there. So,
Yeah, and I do want to just add briefly, I had done the thing. Like what I knew by that point is I knew all the steps that it took to transition from medicine to a health advocate. And whether it's the business, the nuts and bolts of like the business entities, to what kind of services can you offer? How should you price those services? How do you package those services? How do you market a health advocacy business? So I knew that I could share that information with somebody else. But to
mhm,
your point, like, was it perfect? No. And I was definitely underpriced. Like we all, my first iterations, very much underpriced. But also, as it got better, I felt more comfortable charging more, certainly when it was all packaged on a nice platform and all of those things. So, yeah, it's really the key, like we talked about earlier, of iteration. Like, we have to get comfortable as physician entrepreneurs iterating and being okay with, this is the beta version. Okay, now I learned this. I'm going to make it even better. I'm going to make it even better. The people that we're buying things from, they're doing the same thing. I
yes,
mean, whether it's a product or a service, everything we buy, things we wear, it didn't always start out, looking like that. Everybody had a
right,
process where they were just getting started, and then as they got better, their product got better, their service got better. So we shouldn't
right.
feel bad about that.
I just love also too, like that you perfectionism was not even in your mind, and at this point it sounds like, and that seemed to be okay for you.
It still creeps up. I mean, I have to keep, perfectionism is like the best friend that I broke up with a few years ago. So she's still over here trying to like wreak havoc, but I have to, push her out the way. Well, I'm not a violent person, but I have to like tell her to go sit down.
Yeah,
But I mean, I
politely sit
I feel
down.
like,
Yes.
yeah, like you can't. I don't know that you can get through all the medical education and all the things and not, like, that's still a part of me that I have to
Hmm.
constantly battle. but it does not like control me anymore. And so I am able, despite having these slightly perfectionist tendencies, I'm still able to just like push through it. Because otherwise I would have never started. Like you're never going to start. And that's what I'm sure you see too. I see it with a lot of doctors who want to do something else. They get stuck because they're so worried about trying to make it perfect that they just never ever get it off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. And I've seen a lot of dreams just deferred indefinitely. There's a quote that keeps coming up in my brain, or coming up in my mind. I don't know if I'm going to say it exactly right, but um, it's something about the graveyard and how the graveyard is
Ooh,
full of
dream.
unlived
Oh,
potential dreams that have
yes.
died.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I can't, I feel like I can picture the graphic, but I don't remember the quote.
But
Yes,
it's that because we are waiting for something outside of ourselves to tell us that it is okay when it should be coming from the inside and saying, why not? Why not
yeah.
now? How is now the actual perfect time that you need to be
Mm-hmm.
doing this instead?
Yep.
So,
I have started instead, I really now tell myself, like, what would it look like to, instead of being like, well, how am I ever gonna, it's just like, again, it's a mindset thing. Like when I have an idea, again, the first thing that pops in my head may be like, girl, that okay, Nicole, that sounds like a lot. But I push that thought away. And then I'm like, okay, what would it look like to start a coaching program? What would it
mhm,
look like to start a podcast? Like what I mean, I just and then you just like then your brain is helping you. Like, okay, what would it look like to now I'm focused on what do I need to do to make this happen, as opposed to the millions of things why it could go wrong. I can't live over there.
I love that. I love it. Dr. Nicole, so tell us, what else do you have to offer for the doctors? If a doctor wants to start a health advocacy
Mm-hmm.
business, what would you encourage them to do, or how can they get in touch with you? Tell us everything that you
Yes.
have available for us to kind of get more, because this was amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It was so great. It's always great talking to you. But
I
this, we could talk all day, but we can't on the podcast. So you can connect with me on Instagram at the GPS doc. That's like the probably the best way to find me, or my website, YourGPSDoc.com.
know. Hmm.
If you are interested in coaching, to be, if you know, if this has intrigued you and you're thinking that you just want to learn more about how to become a health advocate, I have a free call. We can hop on. I can talk with you about health advocacy, about the field, the industry, and about my program. And that is bit.ly/NHA call. NHA for navigating health advocacy. And the NHA is all caps. So bit.ly/NHA call. Or like I said, follow me on Instagram. And then the last thing I'll share, as you know, Dr. Kim, is that once again, the pattern that your audience has heard is that I basically create things based on my life experiences. And so I have a new podcast that launches on November 4th called Your Next Chapter. I went
Yay!
through a very, very, very painful divorce in 2023, going into the early part of 2024. And I am boldly stepping into my next chapter and reclaiming my joy. And I know that I'm not alone. And many of us have many reasons for our next chapters. And so I invite your audience to find me on the podcast app. I'm not there yet, but you can follow me on Instagram at your next chapter _CO. But look for the Your Next Chapter podcast on November 4th.
And so you're going to be talking about not just navigating the divorce, but also navigating just different transitions.
Life changes, transitions. Yes.
I absolutely adore that. Like I'm super excited to listen. Um,
Thank you.
Dr. Nicole, you have been, and I'm gonna try not to cry on my own damn podcast, but you have been such an incredible part of my
Oh,
journey. Um, from a very long age. You have been a business bestie for a very long time. You were one of the ones that when I'm figuring out my side hustles, when I'm trying to write my book and I'm doing my Facebook show, I'm trying to figure out entrepreneurship and they didn't even have the words for it. You were one of the ones that was there that I continue to follow and to look to. And you have been a big sister. You have been a mentor. You have been a guide. You've been a coach. Even though I've never paid you officially to be a coach, you've been so many different things to me. And I am just so appreciative of you, your walk, your journey, the fact that you continue to show up boldly in this world and continue to not hide behind your experience, but just, like I said, boldly share and boldly to give. I cannot wait. I know some of the stories in your life, and I cannot wait to hear more details about the stories on the podcast because I would love. I can even think of people that you probably need to talk to on your podcast to talk about some of the things with your daughters, with, of course, the divorce, with being a mom, just like all of these different things. So I say all that to say, Nicole, thank you. Just thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing your journey on this podcast. And please don't ever stop. Like, if it's not health advocacy, if it's not health equity, if it's not anything, just the fact that you continue to share your story and share your experiences, you are impacting lives in so many different ways that you will never know. But people will sing your praises for years to come from the impact that you have. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I was trying to see if we were going to get through this without the tears.
No,
I love
you're not.
you. I love you. I love you so much. And I'm just so thankful that you and I both signed up for that coaching program a long time ago.
A long
And
time ago.
it is my honor to be all of that to you. Know that you are that to me and for me as well. And I'm watching you. I'm following you. I'm seeing all the things that you're doing. And I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so proud of you. And thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. And I need to have you again. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be, I would love to hear your experience as being a new podcaster, because that's a whole nother business that people don't talk about. Starting a podcast.
Yes. And I hope that you will be a guest on my podcast, because I know you have some things to share as well.
Yes, I do. I can talk about some rough divorce experiences. I definitely can. So again, no, thank you, Nicole. And like I said, thank you for your time on the Docs Get Money podcast. And yeah, I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Docs Get Money podcast. New episodes drop every Thursday wherever you find your favorite podcast. Share, comment, follow, and subscribe to the Docs Get Money podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more, visit me, Dr. Kimberly Brown, at KimberlyBrownMD.com, and be sure to follow me at Dr. Kimberly B on Instagram. And until next time, let's go get this money, honey.